to our after party after our rally for Ireland Seas earlier on today. So I recognise a few faces from the rally earlier on, but just for those of you that weren't there, it was really brilliant turnout. We had so many people turn up in amazing costumes and signs, and we were singing and chanting. We had TDs and senators come out, and we even had the minister come out as well, which was brilliant because we were able to show him in real life like how many people do really care about Ireland Seas and really want to have this marine protected area legislation enacted as soon as possible. So I'm not sure how much you know about marine protected areas. I could be preaching to the choir here, but I'll give you just a wee brief lowdown on them. So Ireland's marine space is absolutely massive. It's around 7 times bigger than the actual land space, but we only have around 9% of it designated as a protected area under EU law. But I know 9% doesn't sound too bad, but there's actually no management plans in place for this. So this 9% is really just lines on a map or like paper parks, basically. So that's why Fair Seas and all of the partner organisations are working on getting new marine protected area legislation in place so that we can reach 30 by 30. So marine protected areas are really important for so many different reasons. They're important to protect and restore all of our habitats. They're really important for climate change as well. There's lots of marine habitats that really capture and store carbon. So like seagrass beds, different types of mud sediments, they all lock in carbon, and that's our biggest tool in the fight against climate change. They're also really important for fisheries as well. There's a lot of conversation sometimes kind of pitting us advocating for marine protected areas against the fishing industry, and this couldn't be further from the truth, because the fishing industry is struggling at the moment because we're running out of fish. Like, we're not protecting the seas, the fish numbers are going down, and there's research done all around the world about marine protected areas, and there's not one example where a marine protected area has had a negative impact on fish populations. It only increases fish populations, and then obviously then has a positive impact on the fishing industry as well. So we need to have them in Irish waters as well for the Irish fishing industry. And then aside from all these reasons as well, MPAs are so important for vulnerable species that need a bit of protection from human pressures. And one group of vulnerable species is, of course, sharks. So sharks are vulnerable for many, many different reasons, which we'll be chatting about tonight. A lot of them live a long time. You know, they can live 50, 60, 70 years. Some of them even live for hundreds of years. And they don't reproduce until later in life as well. So to even get to the stage where they're able to reproduce and replenish their numbers is actually a bit of a miracle with all the pressures that they have to deal with. So we need to have marine protected areas in place so they have a chance to grow bigger, reproduce more, and replenish their numbers, because unfortunately since the 1970s there's been an over 70% decline in oceanic shark species, which is absolutely heartbreaking and devastating. But thankfully there's a lot of people that are working to try and reverse this, and we've got 3 of them here tonight as well who are going to be chatting about their research and their work in shark conservation. So yeah. So we've got Dr. Jenny Bortoluzzi, who is a shark scientist, and she's currently the lead of the MARÉIRE project, which she'll chat a wee bit about in a wee minute. We've got Dr. McNicholas, who is a postdoc researcher at Trinity, and she looks at how climate change is impacting different shark species. And then we have also got Rachel Coleman Horgan. I could not remember your name. Rachel Coleman Horgan, who's a PhD student at ATU, and she is working with environmental DNA, which is absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to ask you loads of questions on that. But how we can use that to find out more about sharks in Irish waters. So before we get into all the questions about your research and work, could you just let us know, like, why you love sharks so much? Like, what happens, or why do you care so much about them?
Oh, go first. Hi everyone, I'm Rachel. Yeah, so it's kind of a long story, but I started my PhD 3 years ago, and before that I did a master's in marine conservation. But prior to that I had spent time working in the consulting industry in Dublin, and I had done my undergrad in microbiology in Trinity. And then I think it was over kind of like for COVID, a lot of people had time to reflect. And I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And I want to contribute something. So I kind of worked backwards and ended up doing a master's in marine conservation. But I was also, I've always been very interested in genetics and heavily able to get stuck in. So the anyway, masters, I got in contact with my now supervisor in Galway. And I kind of, to be honest, I was happy to work with anything in conservation in the marine environment, because I'm really interested in genetics and conservation genomics and how it can be applied to many, many vulnerable species. But we basically had some conversations with the Marine Institute, and we said, like, where do we need to look, like what gaps can we address, and like how can we develop like something useful that will contribute to what they're trying to do and what we need to know. So yeah, they came back with like, let's start looking at sharks and rays, and obviously they're fairly high on the level of gaps in our knowledge in Ireland. So yeah, there was tons of work that we could do. So we ended up writing our proposal then on skates and rays in the west of Ireland. So I kind of fell into it, but now that I'm here to stay, hopefully. Yeah, so that was me.
I think I also fell into sharks. I actually wanted to be a PE teacher when I was like 15. Does this make it louder?
No,
it's just recording. Yeah, I did my undergrad in like general conservation, and I actually, now I think I only just thought about it now. There was in my third year, I remember there was a PhD student that was working on basking sharks, and he did a load of tagging work up in the Isle of Mull. This was back in 2013 or something like that. And I remember being like, this is really cool. And I think at the time, like that kind of technology was like really emerging. And I remember thinking like, okay, this is awesome. And then I did a master's, and I was really lucky in that time in my master's to like go to Australia and do some work with swordfish. Didn't see any, unfortunately, because they're super critically endangered. And then I came back and I was really interested, I think again, predominantly like methodology based, like spatial ecology, kind of big modeling, using technology to track animals. And my PhD that I just finished was actually on bluefin tuna. So I think I kind of I like the applied methodology and then to a species, and then kind of have, I guess, always peripherally worked in the shark world and then always found my way back. So yeah, kind of a roundabout way as well, I suppose. Yep. Jenny is our real shark lover.
Yeah, in contrast, my story begins when I was. I've got a very typical story where, from a very young age, was in love with nature, with animals. I grew up in Brittany in France, surrounded by the sea, and spent most of my summers in the rock pools looking for any critter that I could find, which I'm sure many of you might resonate with this. But the part where it came down to sharks for me was a documentary. Many of us fell in love with nature through documentaries. For me, it was Shark Water by Rob Stewart. It's a documentary where this young man sets out to film sharks because he grew up swimming with them. But actually when he gets to the places where he saw them, they're no longer there. And so the documentary pivots into a story of what we're doing to our oceans and how we're killing sharks at unprecedented numbers. This was when I was 13. I'm 32 now, and the story has not improved much at all. But that was kind of the start for me of my real interest in sharks and of how misunderstood they are, and how important they are to our ecosystems. I went to Southampton University to do my undergraduate in marine biology, and then I took 2 years out, and actually in those 2 years, there was kind of a shift as well in going from being in love with sharks and wanted to save them, wanted to protect them, to realizing that it's not a shark problem, it's a human problem. And so a lot of the things I did in those 2 years changed my perspective and realized that we had to bring things together and realize that it wasn't just about sharks, it was about figuring out why we do the things we do as humans and as people, and only by understanding those things are we going to be able to change the situation for them. So that was my shark journey.
Yeah, so you're definitely right. It's definitely a human problem. Okay, so we'll talk a wee bit about your research and what you are working on at the moment. So Rachel, could you tell us a bit about what eDNA or environmental DNA is, like how are you able to collect it? What does it tell us, and why is it so important?
So it's a little bit like CSI. So basically, one of the tools that I use to monitor the populations of sharks is called environmental DNA, and it's basically in the water. Like if you imagine the sea and the marine environment, it's not just salt and water. It's made up of like bacteria and single-cell organisms, but also loads of DNA that has been shed by everything and anything that has passed through that piece of the water or through the water column at a given time. So it's like when in CSI they swipe a countertop and they're able to detect what was there. I basically take a water sample, so essentially in a clean bucket, and put it through a filter paper that has teeny tiny holes to capture all of the DNA and or the little bits of material that have been sitting in the water. And from there, I take that filter and it goes through a series of hula hoops in the lab and on the computer, and it turns it into what DNA from what species we have detected in that sample. So yeah, it's very cool. And for my work, there's many different applications of it, but for my work, I work with community assessments. So say from a single sample or from a single sampling event, I can detect like the group of species or the species composition that was in that area. So primarily in Galway, I work in Galway Bay, obviously for access. I'm based in ATU. So, and I also then work offshore with the Marine Institute on some of their acoustic surveys where we couple up our sampling in there, and we're trying to basically design a cost-effective, efficient way to develop monitoring techniques for sharks and rays in Ireland. So yeah, it's really important because with sharks and rays, it's very hard to monitor them. We have a lot of challenges in terms of how we're monitoring them and like how we're like finding out who we have and where they are. So with eDNA, you can design like sampling techniques and basically try and integrate them with ongoing sampling that's happening anyway. And you can really build up like long-term data sets and yeah, hopefully sort of improve our understanding of what we have and where they are at a roughly given time. Like from a sample, so DNA obviously so if they shed some skin or vomit or whatever, puke or whatever, like into the environment, it lasts for a certain amount of time. So you can say you can make a conservative estimate, like where it came from within a reasonable, like you can kind of say it came from this current in this area. You can't say how many you had, but you can say what we had in like presence absence. So it's really important, especially in the space where we're very, very lacking in shark and ray focused monitoring, because much of the monitoring that we have in Ireland is for fisheries and like for commercial fisheries, and then the shark monitoring is kind of like a byproduct of that. So yeah, it's really important that we design like shark focused programs, especially if we have like marine protected areas. And I'm not going to say that it's simple or easy, but it's definitely a useful tool that we can put in our toolbox for like long-term monitoring. Yeah, that's it. CSI sharks.
Yeah, God, it's fascinating. Had anyone here heard of eDNA before? And that you were able to do that? It's so cool, and it's great because obviously we can't protect. Like if we don't know what's there, we're not able to protect it. And then the fact that it's cost effective as well, because I know one of the big things with marine conservation or any nature conservation is the money and the funding.
Yep.
So having this extra thing that is a bit more cost effective is brilliant.
Yeah, like it's cost effective. You do need like certain facilities and certain skills, but
yeah,
it's definitely like it's very well available too. Yeah, so it's cool. Yeah.
Okay, Grace, could you tell us a bit about your research and how climate change is impacting sharks?
So I just started my postdoc on a big. I'm smiling my poster in the middle. As I said, my PhD was on tuna, and within my PhD, I did some modelling and some climate stuff there, and now kind of moving over into the shark world again. So the project that I'm on is like a big multi-million euro kind of project. And within that, we're looking at sensitive shark species around Ireland. So Nick just published a really interesting paper, pretty mind-boggling, that we basically. Okay, wait. Let me go back a few steps. So most people think of sharks as cold-blooded. So most sharks are ectothermic, but there are a few species that are endothermic, so they can regulate and thermoregulate their body temperature. To have specialized red muscle and other organs in their eyes and their brain that they can basically warm these. Whereas up until recently, basking sharks were thought to be cold-blooded, but they're actually endothermic, so they can regulate their body temperature to an extent. However, they need a lot of food and more food than we thought that they needed. But with this, they have a really high metabolic rate, so they're overheating effectively. So they're producing a lot of heat, which they then have to get rid of. If sea surface temperatures and temperatures are warming under climate change, they're basically going to continue to overheat, and that's going to be a real problem for them. How do they lose this excess heat? And are they going to have to start shifting their distribution? So they're going to have to move northwards to avoid this. So my research is still very early days, but it's basically working on this. I'll be moving from a theoretical framework and hopefully applying some more modelling and seeing how basking sharks are going to be one of the main species, how they might move their distributions in the Northeast Atlantic in response to climate change, and hopefully do some poor beagle research as well. So poor beagles, very cool species, and because of these adaptations that allow them to regulate their body temperature, they can live in cooler waters, the same as great whites. So that's kind of the framework. One thing with MPAs, climate change, sharks, it's a real tricky landscape, I suppose. Sharks are real fast. They're moving around a lot. We can put a marine protected area in place, but they might be in it for a day, a few hours. Me and Jenny did some work, which you can talk about after, and poor beagles. We showed that they're just here, there, and everywhere kind of thing. So marine protected areas are great, but we need them to work in a tapestry of other marine protected areas. So when they're moving through one, they're also protected in another area. Same with climate change. If their distributions are shifting and they're moving, we might put, at the moment, we might put an MPA in place that's really relevant for their distribution at the moment. But if seas are warming and then they move, we need to make sure that that designation is also adapting. So it's really important that we understand how their distributions are going to change in the future so that we can adequately protect them. Yeah.
I think I remember when that research came out about the being warm-blooded, and everyone just went crazy.
Yeah.
It was oh my god. Okay. So yeah, this sort of ties in with Jenny's work now as well. So Jenny, could you tell us a bit about the MARÉIRE project and offshore renewable energy and impacts on sharks?
Yeah, thanks. So from a PhD on the ecology and biology of sharks that I did at Trinity and finished in 2023, I moved into a more policy and advocacy space. So what I'm doing now is kind of applying, taking all of the research that these guys are doing and applying it in order to inform government, particularly in the context of offshore renewable energy development. Some of you may know we currently don't have any turbines in the water. We had 7, they're being decommissioned, or they're in the process of being decommissioned off the Arklow Bank, but the process is underway to designate new areas for offshore renewable energy, and mostly it's wind farms. So we went from phase 1, which was developers came to government and said, we want to put a wind farm here, and then they went through the process of planning it, submitting their environmental impact assessments, and then those are kind of approaching the final stages of whether or not they'll be approved. But then the government decided to move into a different process, and instead of developers going to them, the government is creating a map of areas that can have offshore renewable energy in those spaces. It's called the DMAP, the Designated Maritime Area Plans. And so they started with the south coast. They identified 4 spaces there. And now they're moving, they decided instead of doing it regionally, they're going to do the whole country, the whole maritime space, so the national DMAP. My role at the MARÉIRE project is I'm not solely focused on sharks, but it's my personal interest, and I have team members that are looking at the other species, so I kind of have taken on the role of being the voice for sharks. But it's really about helping inform that process so that they're choosing the right places that are going to have the least possible impact on our marine species. It's challenging because that process is further ahead than the MPA process is. So ideally we'd have loved to have those MPAs in place before the offshore renewable energy process was happening. We've been asking for MPAs for years and years, but there's obviously offshore renewable energy is a priority for this government, and we can't deny that. So now our role is to make sure that where they decide to put those places is going to have the least impact on the species, and that includes sharks. Our knowledge of the impacts of offshore renewable energy on sharks, skates and rays is limited. The research, there's a lot of research for cetaceans, there is a lot of research for birds. We can lean on that research to inform them for those species, but when it comes to sharks, it's a lot more challenging because we don't really know how offshore renewable energy is going to impact them. There's different phases to offshore renewable energy. There's the construction. Well, actually it starts before the construction. In the planning phase, there's a lot of surveys that happen. Then there's the construction phase, and then there's the operation phase. And actually we really need to already be thinking about the decommissioning phase as well. So within each of those phases, there's different impacts that can happen for the different species. There's impacts that can happen on the whole ecosystem. Turbines in the water disturb sediment. That sediment can end up being in very high quantities in the water column. And we've got species like basking sharks that are filter feeders. They rely on being able to filter plankton from the water in order to feed, because they've got such high energetic requirements. But if we're suddenly creating a space where the basking sharks normally feed and suddenly there's lots of sediment in the water, that plankton is either no longer able to bloom the way it would, or it's there, but then the basking shark is potentially eating as much sediment as it is plankton, and that's not good for it. So we need to be considering those things in order to figure out where to put offshore renewable energy, because we do need offshore renewable energy. We need to decarbonize our system, but we need it to be done properly well. And I think we understand that we're never going to have zero impact, but we need to mitigate those impacts as much as possible. And in order to be able to mitigate them, we need to understand them. So things like electromagnetic fields from the cables have an impact on sharks and skates and rays, particularly species that spend a lot of time on the bottom and don't move much across spaces. They might be spending a lot of time above those cables, around those cables, and that exposure to those electromagnetic fields could be having a large impact on their physiology, their biology, their reproduction, for species that are already extremely vulnerable to fisheries pressures. So I work on trying to making sure that we identify where those knowledge gaps are, funding some of it. I'm limited, I'm an ENGO, we're an ENGO, so the funds are limited, but we can try and push for some of that research to be done, and we can also push the government to say, these are where the knowledge gaps are, you need to focus some of the research on these spaces. So that's largely my work. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly like what you were saying there, we need offshore renewable energy to decarbonise, but then it can have an impact on sharks, but then climate change is having an impact on sharks, so it's all about getting things in the right place and marine protected areas in the right place as well. So yeah, is there any questions from the audience? Yeah, I'll give you this mic as well. Don't worry. Yeah, just so it can pick you up.
Yeah. On that note, how do you decide where the balance should be between those different objectives?
Who wants to answer that, Jenny?
I don't make any decisions, but I can try and make sure that we're informing those decisions as much as possible. Of course, there's political will behind it, but we can make sure that the information that we have and that we need is in their hands. So we do a lot of, within the NGO sector, including my team and most of the Fair Seas team, go to so many meetings with government, with different civil servants, with different consultation processes, whether it's the MPA process, whether it's the offshore renewable energy process, whether it's the nature restoration law process. All of these things, we're feeding as much of that information as possible, but we can only feed it into those processes if we've got it. So there's a level of translation that needs to happen from the pure research academic side into our space of policy and advocacy. So we also engage a lot with academia on that front in order to make sure that that information reaches them as much as possible. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Is there another question? Christian?
Yeah, can I just shout across?
I put it in the right one actually because it's
Oh,
Just so
yeah.
it can
Sorry,
pick
thanks
up.
so much.
So, thank you so much for being here. This is really, really great. And I just wondered, what's the feeling like? How well are those panels and governments, and how well are people listening?
I feel like Grace can answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to marine protected areas, like we are in a better place than we have been before. Like I think after our rally earlier on, a lot of us joined a call on the Atlantic sensitivity analysis. So it's kind of looking at the different species and stuff that should be taken into account when designating marine protected areas. And they've done this analysis in other areas as well, and we fed back to them the issues that we found with it, and now they've actually corrected some of that as well. So they are listening. But yeah, like sort of Jenny mentioned as well, it's that political will to get it through. There's a lot more stakeholder engagement going on, and they're talking to the ENGOs and they're talking to the fishing community, and we keep pressing that everyone needs to be brought along, otherwise it's not going to work. But yeah, it's that political will then to actually get it over the line.
Yeah, I think also there's a difference in the levels within government. From my personal experience, when we engage with civil servants, they're very open. So they want to hear from us. They want us to feed into the process. They want to make sure this process is science-based. It's backed by science. Their hands are often tied by certain processes, by the political will behind them. But also, I think that science-based approach is so important, but it's where the work that the researchers are doing is crucial, because when we look at sharks and rays in Ireland, we know quite a lot of basking sharks, no offence to myself and to Grace, but basking sharks and poor beagles, they're charismatic species. There's still a lot we don't know about them, but we do have a good level of knowledge of where they're going and what they're doing when they're there. There are so many species that we have no information about. And when we're consulting with government about the ecological sensitivity analysis and they're asking us where is safe to put offshore renewable energy and where is not safe to put renewable energy, a lot of the time we can't say where is safe, because we can only say what we know, but we can't say what we don't know. So we can say, we know that sharks are doing something in this space that is really important to their survival. There's a critical habitat here for them. You shouldn't put an offshore renewable energy in this field, in this space. But in another space, if we don't have any information, that doesn't mean nothing is happening. It might just mean that we haven't discovered it yet, because we haven't studied those species that are less charismatic, the skates and the rays, the smaller sharks. there are so many of them that we don't know where they're doing important things, and yet they are doing important things in these spaces. And so work like Rachel is doing on monitoring skates and rays in a way that isn't tied to fisheries is really critical, because we recently did a process called the Important Shark and Ray Areas process, which is where we bring together all of the scientific knowledge that we have about these species to identify, to put those areas on maps on where is critical for those species. And when you look at the list of species that we know occur in Ireland versus the list of species that we were able to designate to like identify areas for, there's a mismatch. We know the most about the most charismatic species, and there is still so many of those flat sharks and the smaller sharks, the deep sea sharks, that we don't know anything about. And for those species, it is urgent for us to get some of that knowledge, because these processes aren't going to wait for us to know that information.
You got a question? Yeah. There you go.
Thank you. I'm aware that there were about 5 or 6. I'm afraid they weren't sharks. No, I'm not afraid they weren't sharks. But dolphin and porpoises washed up, dead along by Shankill, South Dublin, North Wicklow, over a period of a couple of weeks. And I'm just wondering, does anybody know what caused their death? I know that we're going to do one autopsy, but yeah, that was just.
Eva might.
Eva, you've got someone from the Irish Whale and Dolphin group here. I don't know if Eva knows.
What is she?
Is Eva gone?
She might go.
She might be gone. I don't know. Do you know?
I don't know.
You're drawing a blank from us.
A sonar thing, or if sharks have sonar as well, and something got knocked off. I don't know, but I was wondering if anybody knew that.
I think we could try and find out and get back. If the Irish Whale and Dolphin group have done some postmortems and stuff on to see if there's any information that we can let you know.
They have a new spotting tool as well. Whale and Dolphin Group, they just relaunched their spotting app.
Oh, a new app.
Oh,
Yeah, for live and sightings.
Okay. Any more questions? Oh, there's 3 more. Okay. Let's see. I'll go for you first. There you go.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about engaging with the fishing community and how they're receiving this, or how they're willing or interested in participating, and the impact that it has both on them and on yourselves, interchangeably.
Grace. Yeah.
This is Grace's bread and butter.
I can talk way more than you, because I'm sure you have worked with the fishing community on your research as well. But I would work with them in regards to policy and marine protected areas. And yeah, there's a lot of trust to rebuild up, because there's a lot of mistrust over the years. The same sort of with like environmentalists and farmers as well. The media tries to like pit us against each other, when really we all want the same things. Like, we want a healthy ocean and we want lots more fish. But we were recently speaking in the Dáil, the Joint Oireachtas Committee on marine protected areas, and it was Fair Seas with our Irish Wildlife Trust. Myself was there, Birdwatch, and then we had representatives from the fishing, in the big fish producer organisations there, and everybody was saying the same thing, that they want to be brought along as well, that it's not just a top-down approach, that it's someone sitting in an office in Dublin then being like, right, there's a marine protected area here, and like nobody knows about it. Just that the fishing community just don't want to be forgotten about and to be brought along from the very beginning. There obviously is some stuff that has to be changed. There's certain damaging fishing techniques. Like, I don't know if you've heard about tangle netting before around the Kerry coast, and that's having a big impact on critically endangered sharks. So that was another conversation we had. That's one of the difficult conversations that has to be had, and there'll be more coming down the line as well. But I think if we just have to keep talking with them and engaging with them and trying to get supports from government as well for them as well, especially for our small scale fishing communities and the island fishing communities, because they're really struggling. for a lot of different reasons. Like a lot of the big trawlers get most of the Irish quota, and then the rest, the small amount, is split among, you know, the vast majority of the fishing fleet. So trying to support them in that and getting that changed as well. So yeah, it's going to be a really long journey, but I think it's going okay so far. And we just have to keep those channels of communication open and build up the trust. I don't know about you with working with fishing.
I don't know, like recreational kind of stuff. Yeah, I think this is a sector like a lot of people, I don't know, I guess you didn't like necessarily think about, but like I think at the rally earlier someone asked like, is any fisherman here? And someone was like, oh, I'm a recreational fisher. Yeah, I suppose like one thing as an academic, we like, hopefully I don't do this, but like people like tend to sit in their like little ivory tower, and I think we can all get very siloed into our own kind of agenda, I suppose. And your question also was great of like, how do you pick things, like who's screaming the loudest, like what kind of angle are things coming from. And one of my colleagues, he works on taupe and has done a big survey with like taupe anglers around Ireland. And I think a lot of people want to engage, especially like a lot of like younger people coming through. And I suppose like there is usually a big crossover between people that are like recreational fishing or like actually working like the fishing industry. And I think like, again, that's kind of been said at the rally, like everyone fundamentally wants the same thing, right? That it's just like, how do we all get there? And I actually went to a really interesting talk recently. I can't remember, it was kind of how, I'm not gonna do this justice, but like, we all kind of like have a triangle of like, what our interests are and whatever. And like when, say you've got like two peaks like this, triangle to triangle, when you bring it down to a level, like those triangles at some point like cross over, and it's just like stripping away, I suppose, like the fear of like talk to people, and like the, you know, this is gonna be bad. And as Grace has said multiple times, like MPAs are only ever gonna benefit like fishermen and stuff. It's just finding that right balance. I went off on a tangent there, but I don't know, like, so it's just interesting having these like chats and like different perspectives, and I think the more you talk to different people from like different angles, like it just sparks off something, and you're like, oh cool, like have you thought about this thing or whatever. So yeah.
So where I'm from Kerry, and I'm quite close to like a small fishing community, and I would say that like a lot of the people who work in the fishing community, they are really hurting. Like they've had, like I don't even think it's like obviously the MPA conversation, but even before that and from a longer period of time, they've been suffering. And like so, the MPA conversation is just, you know, another thing that they're dealing with, and that they're trying to manage. You know, how to navigate like basically the environment like that they're working in now. Like I know some people in the fishing community at home who, for reasons unrelated to MPAs, like haven't actually fished, like haven't taken their boat out in 2 years because they're involved in like an area that's now been closed because of the detection of an invasive species. So that has basically locked down their fishing because they can't transfer mussel seed basically around because there's an invasive limpet off the southeast coast and it can't come down to Kerry. So like there's so many things going on that like is really like affecting the communities. But I don't work necessarily with the fishing community for my work, but I, you know, have a lot of personal relationships with people, and they always just think it's hilarious. They're like, you like those fish, the skates. They're like, those ones. I'm like, yeah, nobody likes them. Everyone forgets about them, and they're my favorites. And they're like, how did you get into that? They just think I'm a bit mad, but yeah, like they definitely are. I think interested in, like, just personally speaking to people, like interested in my research, interested in what I'm doing, wanting to know more about it and understanding what we're doing. And I think if we can, you know, keep framing it that like protection and conservation benefits everyone, then like it's just like the best way to lead the conversation.
Yeah. Do you want to talk to me?
I'll try to keep it short enough, but I could talk about this subject for a very long time. I mentioned earlier that I pivoted, like there was a shift for me in those 2 years after my undergraduate. and two of the crucial experiences for that was I volunteered in the Philippines on a project looking at mobile arrays. While I was there, the mobile array got added to Appendix 2 of the CITES Convention, which is the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. In the Philippines, that results in an automatic ban of the fishing of this species. So other countries might deal with it differently, but this is how the Philippines deals with the addition of a species to one of the appendices. And that meant that this fishing community, who had their entire livelihood was based on the fishing of this species, suddenly lost their income, their way to send their kids to school, to feed their families, and we were suddenly blamed for it, of course, because we were the white people there who were on the beach every single day, taking measurements and samples from this species. And who can blame them for blaming us? But also, there was no process for them to. They were small scale fishers. What they caught in one day or 1 month or 1 year was so small in comparison to the big industrial vessels that were coming into the Filipino waters and catching trawler nets full of these species. So of course there was a level of unfairness in the process, and they were then offered to become potato farmers for people who had spent their whole lives were connected to the sea. They were suddenly being offered something that meant they would never step onto a boat again. And we might think this is a global south problem. It's not. I then went back to France and did 3 months of socioeconomic surveys. So I went out and asked fishermen questions about how much money they were making from the catches they were getting, and all of them reported a decline in what they were able to catch because of the people in their offices in the EU. But they didn't understand why they weren't allowed to catch this species anymore, because they were still catching nets full of it. But you went 20 kilometers up the coast and they'd not seen that species in years. So there's a problem in how we communicate things. There's a problem in how we engage with them. There's a problem in how we always talk about bringing them into the conversation. They should be in the conversation from the very beginning, from before we have the conversation. And so now in these meetings that we go into, that trust is long since broken. We have a huge amount of work to do in order to be able to bring them back into the fold, but also we have to realize that a huge part of that comes down to the economy and to how much until we can offer them compensation for the changes we're asking them to make, they're not going to be willing to make it, because they're losing out on a huge portion of their livelihoods if we ask them to make those changes. And this is again where political will comes into it. We have to we have to be a voice for them as much as we are a voice for the species, because without them we won't be able to help these species. So it's often challenging to be talking to them because we're still seen as the enemy. A lot of the time, but actually when you get into those conversations with them, they are fully aware that we're on the same side. They agree with us, we agree with them. So it's just about finding the right language and the right ways to exchange that knowledge, because they have so much knowledge. Like Grace was saying, we both worked with recreational fishers for our PhDs. And I wouldn't have been able to do any of the research I did without them. They know where to go to catch the sharks. They know how to handle them. They know what bait to use to catch them. They know their behaviours. They know there's so much information that they have, and we're suddenly then publishing it and being like, new discovery, and they're like, we've known this for years. So the way we communicate things and stepping down from that ivory tower is so important.
I think we've time for do we have time for another question?
Hence.
It depends how long I speak.
We'll take the right way of time.
Rachel, how long do we have? 5 minutes left?
We'll get to
Yeah, I'll do 5 minutes, and
But-
then I want to give some time to the call to action as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
I will do that as well. Okay, so maybe we'll try and get, or we'll do really quick answers. Maybe we can get both of them in.
Thank you. Thanks a million for this event. I'm very excited. After 6 years of living in Ireland, to finally among fellow shark enthusiasts like you. I've lived in Malta for a couple of months to volunteer with Shark Left Malta, and they do amazing work, like going to the wholesale fish market, collecting data on shark rays and skates that are there, actually working together with fishermen, and then collecting egg cases, hatch the sharks, release back into the Mediterranean, kinds of things like that. And ever since moving over to Ireland, I've been very keen to get involved as a volunteer, like a citizen scientist or something along those lines, to get involved and offer my time to in shark research and conservation. But I've only ever been able to, go to the Greystones beach, collect those shark egg cases and send the data over to Shark Trust, but I haven't been able to find any projects here that I will be able to offer my time to. Is there anything in the Dublin area, perhaps?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I know about the Angel Shark Project. It's probably come up with your searching, and Louise Overy is a brilliant researcher. She's working on with the Angel Shark Project, and I know that she is crying out for any data, not just on the egg cases, but also if you see any, so not just the angel sharks. I mean, you'd be super lucky if you've seen an angel shark because they're so rare. But any sort of species, any ray, skate, shark, any sort of photo ID. So if you're out swimming, snorkeling, diving, any of that data is really important, and just email it over to the Angel Shark Project. I don't know if you know about any other sort of.
I'll give a brief overview about the citizen science projects I know in Ireland. You mentioned the Shark Trust. You can also report those shark egg case to Marine Dimensions. They share data, but the Irish-based one is Marine Dimensions. That's headed by Breed O'Connor. The Irish Elasma Brandt group is headed by Louise Overy, and then we've got the Irish Basque and Shark group, who we collect Irish Basque and Shark sightings. Where the big knowledge gaps are at the moment is people collect the egg cases. It's great on the beaches, but we actually don't know where they are in situ below the water, where they're hatching from. So any divers, snorkelers, swimmers who are in the ocean, if you ever see an egg case that has a shark in it, please report it, share that information. As Grace said, any sightings of any sharks is really important. Now, I know that it's frustrating when you want to volunteer your time. My suggestion for you is don't wait for a project to come to you. Make that project. If you're near Greystones, maybe get a group of people to go out on a regular basis to survey that beach, because that regular surveying of the beach, even when there's no egg cases, that's really important information to know. Seasonally and so on, but get a group of people together and do that beach survey on a regular basis. That's huge. I know it seems like not much because you do it for pleasure, but actually that's huge. And when it comes to other things, stay tuned, because and follow us on social media. We are going to try and, I think, as a network, develop community science projects. I'm going to leave it there because otherwise I'll talk for you.
I just have one very, very quick thing, and I feel like this is just volunteering it across the board. If you want to get involved, I feel like often people blanket, I want to volunteer, I want to help. What specifically do you have? And if you're really good at data management, email be I'm really good at data management. Let me do something there. I'm really good at Instagram posts. Let me do that. Bring something unique that you have, and specifically say that, because I think so many people are yeah, I'm really interested in volunteering, and they're okay, cool, but so lots, just yeah. And we
get
said,
so
do
many
something
emails.
that you're keen. Okay, next one.
Do we have time? There was one last question. Is it super quick?
could be super quick. Yeah.
Okay, we've got like a minute and then.
I live in the west of Ireland, in a fishing village, and the problem appears that the government can produce all sorts of rules and regulations, and when it was decided that there was a limit on the number of pollock that could be caught, there was outrage, and it was because there are factory ships, 15 kilometres outside, beyond Inishbofin and Inishturk, and they're just sweeping everything up. And certainly I was saying to Jack that, you know, I haven't seen a crab on our pier for 5 years, and it used to be swarming with them. And I'm afraid it's the same also with shellfish. The shellfish and the razor clams and small clams, they're gone. I mean, they're pretty well gone. And it's not just people over, you know, picking them. It's all to do with climate change and the way we regulate things. And what I'd like to just finish up by saying is, if we can liaise with the individual fishermen, that rather than top down saying, oh, this is what you should do, they're willing, but they're not willing at the moment, certainly, because it's survival.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, you're totally right. And we're trying to do that as well. There's lots of us going around peers and trying to have conversations with individuals as well to get that trust and work back up again. Okay, so I think. Okay.
Sorry, I know, sorry, but you touched on two different type of fisheries there, and I think that is somewhere that is really important for us to recognise. And there's the small scale fishers, the local fishers, the fishers you can meet on the piers and have conversation with, and we can engage with them to co-design management, and MPAs and so on. The ones that are actually having one of the hugest impacts are those industrial fisheries. You can't talk to those fishermen on a one-to-one scale. That is where the top-down approach has to happen. But so often that top-down level happens at EU level mostly. So we do engage with EU, but it's so much more challenging. And our FMOs, which are regional fisheries management organisations that manage fisheries at a basin scale, so in the Atlantic, those are a space where so much of that impact really happens, but that is also one of those spaces where there's so many lobbyists from the other side. So it's so challenging for us to operate at that level and to have an impact at that level, but it is so crucial that we do. So that is a space that we need to really engage. That's a note for myself more than for you guys.
So thank you so much everyone for coming out. And if you haven't already, check out Fair Seas. They're a coalition of environmental NGOs, including I'm with the Irish Wildlife Trust. There's the Sustainable Water Network, Irish Whale and Dolphin Group. You can go onto their website and socials and see all the work that we're doing. And at the moment we actually have something that everybody can do now as well. So political pressure, I think we talked about political pressure loads tonight, and the political will needs to be there to move stuff forward. So First Seas have put together a letter writing tool. Jack is holding up a QR code, and so is Kieran there. So if you could scan that will take you to the website, and then there's already a pre-written letter there, and all you have to do is fill in your name, where you're from. It'll go to the Taoiseach, Minister Dooley and Minister O'Brien, telling them how important marine protected areas are, why we want them, and that we want the marine protected area legislation released without delay. So that's a really important action that everybody can do now as well. It'd be great if you could. Okay, so there we go.